Hey, welcome everyone to my continuation of what are my favorite theorems. Very biased collection as usual. Today I would like to talk about something I find very confusing in the sense that they have some pretty nice results, but it's very confusing that I haven't seen them around a lot. I will comment on that on the very last slide. But essentially, I would like to tell you about multiplicative compositions or partitions. I will see the difference. So either partition, can I spell partition? Who knows? Partitions or compositions? Kind of the same, we'll see. And they have a very nice sibling, which is called additive compositions, partitions, whatever. So here we have multiplicative in this video, and I will recall what additives are anyway, and what is known about additives. And the sibling is kind of much more well studied. It's quite out there and it just appears like everywhere. And then you go to the multiplicative one, which is essentially exactly the same definition. And turns out that it's much more difficult. That's already strange. It's much more difficult. But also it doesn't seem to appear anywhere. And I just wonder, I kind of wonder in the end why that is the case. Okay, but let's have a reminder here. So an integer partition, I will always drop the integer. A partition, an additive partition if you want, is just an ordered way of writing some number as a sum of numbers. 4 equals 2 plus 1 plus 1. Here are all integer partitions of 5, of 6, of 6, 5, of 6. So 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 is the first one. 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, and so on. So let me just mark. Ooh, that was a bad marking. Let me just use black maybe and mark this one here. So this one here would be 2 plus 2 plus 2. I hope the picture makes sense. This one here would be 4 plus 1, so they all should add up uh, to 6. And order just means whatever kind of little box you see in the front is longer than the next box, is longer than the next box, blob, box, whatever you want to call them. Blob is very nice. Everyone likes blobs. So the first blob is longer or equal to the next blob, is longer or equal to the next blob. That's this ordered condition. And if you do it unordered, like this guy here, let me just pick out one of them. Maybe this one here in the middle. This is 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1. If you just do it unordered, so just blobs without any order on the blobs, you call it a composition. So here another example for 4 instead of 6. These are again compositions of 6, by the way. And that's kind of a cool picture. So you have either ordered blobs where the length successively goes down, and that's partitions, or you have unordered blobs, that's compositions. And they appear like really everywhere in mathematics. So Euler already studied counting formulas for those guys, and it is really classical. I haven't tracked it quite back who studied them first, but if Euler studied them, it must be older than Euler. So that's what I can kind of guarantee. Um, Euler was, of course, just a genius. I have no idea. Maybe Euler came up with this. Probably should have checked. But the ones we will see are much, much younger later. But anyway, I hope this is clear, like little blobs, and you add little blobs together. And I really want to sell this picture here of adding little blobs. Well, it was stolen from Wikipedia, but it's a kind of really nice way of thinking about partitions and compositions. Again, partition, ordered, composition, unordered. Okay, and we want to count them, and it turns out that it's not so difficult. Fun fact, here proof without words above. The number of compositions of n is just 2 to the n minus 1. And you just match them with the endpoints of a hypercube, here in this case just a cube. And yeah, I just leave it with that, proof without words. You're supposed to figure out what's going on. Maybe one hint, on the right you see the compositions, and there must be some nice bijection to the left thing, which is like kind of the vertices of the hypercube. The number of partitions is a bit more difficult to write down. It has a very nice asymptotic formula. Here it is. So here asymptotic means the ratio is good. So the formula, well, here comes a fun fact. I always like to say there is no closed formula for the number of partitions. Turned out that there is one. And I just copied it from Wikipedia because I was too lazy to type it. It's just too large and too complicated. Anyway, there is a closed formula for the number of partitions, and it's in my honest opinion here. Well, in my humble opinion, whatever you want to call it, it's just ugly as fuck. It's just terrible. I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry. It's just terrible. It contains derivatives, hyperbolic signs. It contains sums over e's of delicate sums. Oh god, it's very complicated. And it's maybe even only a semi-closed formula because it uses a convergence sequence. But anyway, so I'm not quite sure. So in general, I don't like it's just too complicated. So usually we don't like these formulas, and you definitely don't need to remember it. Um, so the asymptotic is much nicer. So generally, if you think about counting problems, you either end up with a spot on nice formula or with some nice asymptotic formula. And very rarely you have some really complicated number of partitions thing. So in general, number of partitions, people have studied them a lot, as I said. So there are many, many formulas for that thing. If you run into different counting problems, most of the time you don't have a nice closed formula. Yeah, and it depends on your opinion. Some people like formulas, but I feel like this is way too much for me. So I don't call this a nice closed formula, but there is one in some sense. It's just difficult. Anyway, so kind of easy, right? Not so bad. Not so bad. The asymptotic is not so difficult to prove actually. And the top one, the asymptotic for the composition, is just beautiful. Just proof without words. Enter multiplication. So a multiplicative partition. Exactly the same thing, but with, well, let's go back. Replacing the addition symbol here, this guy and this little guy here, by a multiplication symbol, like this guy and this little guy here. Well, 12 is 3 times 1, 3 times 1 times 1. Yeah, absolutely. That's 12. 3 times 2 times 2. And do it in an ordered way, you get multiplicative partitions. Do it in an unordered way, like this guy here, you get multiplicative compositions. And kind of fun is additive, like at least goes back to Euler. So Euler is my earliest reference. I'm pretty sure it has appeared before. But anyway, these multiplicative partitions, as far as I can tell, don't appear before the 1920s, which is like really late, I find, for such a natural question. It's like factoring of integers. Not quite prime factors, but factoring of integers. Why haven't they appeared before? It's a bit confusing. But anyway, if you just plot those numbers, compared the additive, let's say, partitions towards the multiplicative partitions, you kind of see why there's not too much work on them, because they look much more difficult. It's like the number of additive partitions just goes up, and essentially our little asymptotic formula here describes the growth rate of this guy here. Yeah. And what is a growth rate here? It just goes up and down like hell. So the number of ways to factor an integer just really depends on the integer. It's like up and down crazy. So counting them should be more difficult. And actually, just looking at the picture which I just plotted, it's not even clear that you can actually say anything at all, right? It goes up and down like hell. Turns out you can, but you need to, well, if whenever you have a picture that goes like this, like it's much better instead of describing the curve to try to describe the average, and that's what people did. So the average formulas actually have not too bad formulas. The average number of multiplicative compositions or partitions. So the small is the partition ones. So these are the partition ones. These are the composition ones. It's actually not so bad. And what I mean by average is I just wrote it like this. But let's say you take this n here and you put it on the other side, then you would get a 1 over n here. And this is really just the average, right? So just averaging over. How do you compute an average? You sum everything up and divide by the total number. So the average number is actually not so bad. It has not such a bad formula. It's clearly more difficult than the number of partitions, but not that much more difficult. The average number of compositions is but much more difficult than the average number than the number of compositions. The additive ones was really simple. Remember, proof without words. I leave it to you to figure out how the proof without words works. But anyway, the multiplicative one is difficult. So it has two numbers which are probably transcendental, and one of them can be computed from the other. So the only interesting one is, let's say, the exponent. And the exponent here is the unique solution of the Riemann zeta function evaluated at x equals 2. Okay, that's a number. It has some integer description, some decimal description, some floating description, 1.72 something. But the formula is much more difficult somehow. And yeah, so I'm still very surprised if you just look how new this is and how crazy actually the numbers itself look like, that you can get these two precise results is kind of surprising. They're clearly more complicated than the additive versions, but it's still surprising that you can. It's not so bad, right? The top formula is not so bad. The bottom formula is not so bad, up to the fact that there's some a little bit of crazy constants around. Well, not so bad. I actually like that a lot. So I wondered for some time. Well, I don't have an answer. Why actually don't these multiplicative partitions, compositions, whatever, appear more often? Uh, doesn't seem to be obvious to me. It's kind of a natural question. It's factoring of integers. People should like factoring of integers, shouldn't they? I mean, factoring of integers. Everyone likes factoring of integers. Probably absolutely no one likes factoring of integers compared to the overall population, so the average number of people. But at least I would suspect most people watching this video like some form of factoring of integers, in particular if you made it this far. Anyway, I feel like it's kind of a funny effect that it's kind of an old joke that is around in mathematics and science in general for a long time, kind of related to, okay, you have a Petri plate and some form of bacteria, there are many, many different bacteria. Some are really easy to grow in a Petri plate, some are much more difficult to grow in a Petri plate, and we know a hell ton more, a lot more about a bacteria that are easy to grow in a Petri plate compared to those that are not. And somehow the same is happening in mathematics, probably everywhere. So things that are easier to describe usually attract more attention because they're easier to describe. In the end, you need to write a paper about something, right? You don't want to write a paper about, oh, there is something I want to define, but I have no idea what to do. Um, that's usually a very bad paper. So that seems to be the reason why. But I'm not 100% sure. But if say it again, one of them appeared in the 1920s, which is really late. And the other one, the additive partitions, are just everywhere. And even if you haven't seen them so far, I claim if you just go on in your mathematical life, eventually you will see additive partitions. And I haven't seen multiplicative partitions anywhere really appearing outside of the questions I just formulated here in this video. Don't know what's going on. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I also hope to see you next time.